Greetings, dear viewers. Imagine a scooter. Any scooter, absolutely any, regardless of brand or era. At their core, they are all the same. An enclosed body, a flat footboard, small wheels. All these are common features of a scooter. They are widespread, and the whole world is fascinated by the scooter for its simplicity and convenience. However, do you know how it all started and who designed the world's first scooter? You'll find out now. Presenting to you the first scooter in human history called Unibus. You're on the Cross Moda channel. Enjoy watching. By the time the Unibus scooter debuted in 1920, some engineers had already proposed motorcycle designs that, in their concept, offered greater comfort, protection from splashes of dirt, and a seating position that allowed for use by women. That is, it was intended to be safely operated even while wearing a voluminous dress or a long skirt. However, it was this particular machine that, for the first time in human history, combined all the characteristic features of a scooter, namely a closed body, a flat footboard, and small wheels. Unibus was definitely ahead of its time. If you were shown a photo of it out of context, you would probably guess it's much younger than it actually is. But no, Unibus was designed more than 100 years ago. Let's take a closer look at this machine. The history of Unibus in many ways mirrors the story of one of the most successful scooters in the world, Vespa, which was created thanks to the imagination and technical knowledge of an aviation engineer who worked at an airline company, who, after the war, remained in a defeated country with a ban on producing military aircraft and with excess manufacturing capacity. It is well known that Corradino d'Ascanio hated motorcycles. Therefore, when the Piaggio company tasked him with developing a two-wheeled motorized vehicle, he was inspired by aircraft engineering solutions. For the most part, he didn't invent something completely new, but rather largely followed the same path of the Briton Harold Boltby. It is not known for certain whether d'Ascanio knew about Boltby or was inspired by him. The story repeated itself almost exactly according to the template. Let's move from Italy in 1945 to 60 years earlier. In 1886 in Witton, Yorkshire, Harold Dalton Boltby was born. The Boltby family was not poor, which allowed Harold to receive a good education. In 1908, he graduated from Cambridge. At that time, young people from certain social classes were gripped by aviation fever. In 1903, the Wright brothers proved that a structure heavier than air was capable of flying and changed the world forever. Boltby was one of those who sought to improve aviation, and in 1909 he proved himself right by patenting the first retractable landing gear design. This was his first encounter with wheels on vehicles, but not his last. By 1911, Boltby was working as a drafting engineer at a naval shipyard. Then from 1913, he worked as a draftsman under the supervision of Henri Coanda in Bristol. After the First World War, he got a job at the Gloucestershire Aircraft Company. By 1919, the demand for airplanes had dropped catastrophically, and the company was looking for ways to reorient its production. However, many aircraft manufacturers switched to motorcycle production after the war. These included BMW, Sopwith, and so on. So, within the walls of the Gloucestershire Aircraft Company, which by that time had been renamed to Gloucester, Harold Boltby developed a completely unique motorcycle. The Unibus looked extremely unusual and caused a stir among the public when it was presented at the exhibition in the summer of 1920. The scooter was aimed at wealthy customers and cost £96. That was the same price as the new Brav Superior Superbike. That was also the average annual salary of a worker. So what did the consumer get for that amount? They got one of the most advanced motorcycles of its time. The Unibus was equipped with a single-cylinder, two-stroke engine with a displacement of 269 cubic centimeters and a power output of 2.5 horsepower, air-cooled, located directly behind the steering column. At the same time, the crankshaft axis was positioned along the length of the scooter. The magneto was in the front, while the clutch and the two-speed gearbox were in the rear. From the gearbox, torque was transmitted to the rear wheel by a shaft with a worm gear. The chassis was designed according to automotive standards. It definitely incorporated some design solutions. The frame was a steel tub with perforated horizontal guides and cross panels forming boxes for the steering column and the underseat compartment. The body was made of stamped aluminum and completely covered the engine, fuel, and oil tanks and the underseat space. The latter had a decent volume and was intended for storing tools and carrying luggage. Perhaps the most unconventional feature of her Unibus was its dual braking system with 2 pairs of brake shoes. One pair was operated by hand and the other by foot. Both brakes worked inside the rear-wheel drive housing, not in the hub, as became standard later. Also unusual for a motorcycle of that period was the soft suspension of both wheels. The rear wheel was sprung using quarter-elliptic springs. The fork was also sprung with short arms pivoting from the bottom of the steering column. The spring's ends were attached to the steering column and the leading link ahead of the front axle. This was terrible from a physics standpoint because the wheelbase changed while driving over bumps. But in practice, it turned out to be surprisingly comfortable and predictable in terms of handling. The wheels were small, just 16 inches across. I should note that by today's standards, 16 inches sounds unusual. Nowadays, that's the diameter of the wheel rim. At the start of the 20th century, that was the wheel's total diameter in inches. The engine was started with a crank handle with a wooden grip mounted on an aluminum dashboard connected to the flywheel by a chain. It was enough to gently pull the handle to start the low-compression engine. The engine was completely hidden under the casing around the steering column and breathed through an oval mesh grille at the front of the scooter. This engine placement provided excellent weight distribution and balance, and in reviews from drivers of that time, confident handling and comfort worthy of the Unibus's price were noted. Overall, the Unibus was a very neat design, carefully thought out by an engineer who understood the need for compactness, good weight distribution, comfort, and an appealing shape. In each of these aspects, he achieved remarkable results and laid the foundation for all subsequent scooters. The press of that time shared the same opinion. The Motorcycling magazine from June 28, 2020 noted, "No matter how you look at the Unibus, it is the result of an engineer's work from start to finish. The design marks a new era in the progress of two-wheeled transportation." The Motorcycle magazine from December 2 of the same year wrote, "One of the most interesting exhibits in the lineup of small motorcycles is the Unibus, which demonstrates clear originality. Ease of cleaning, protection from bad weather, key design features." Unibus was mainly advertised using women motorcyclists in velvet dresses and elegant cloche hats. The company also provided vehicles for test drives and to non-motorcycle publications. For example, the newspaper The Field, a publication for country gentlemen that was generally opposed to motorcycles and motorcycling, praised the Unibus for providing complete protection from the road for both the rider and the mechanism in any weather. The Field astutely noted that the price of £96 was too high to ensure popularity, which turned out to be a bitter truth. The Unibus was not a mass-market product due to its high cost. It is believed that fewer than 100 scooters were built between 1920 and 1922. Only about 6 have survived to this day, a sad testament to the fate of the industry's pioneer. There is another story connected with the Unibus and the invention of the scooter. This is the social story of women on wheels. Two-wheeled vehicles played an important role in social changes for women. As the bicycle challenged Victorian ideas about appropriate clothing for women and their freedom of movement. The incredible popularity of ordinary bicycles since the 1870s showed that corsets and voluminous skirts were simply impossible for the modern woman leading an active lifestyle. By the 1900s and 1910s, most British motorcycle manufacturers' catalogs featured motorcycles designed specifically for women with a low frame. This was an attempt by companies to compete for a new customer. The women's model was essentially an evolution of the open-frame bicycle design. a style almost as old as the safety bicycle itself, which first appeared in Britain in 1888. An interesting machine that was actively advertised by women in the second half of the 1910s was the Naraka. This was a motorcycle with bodywork that protected the rider from dirt and splashes, and a low frame that allowed riding in a skirt. The Naraka was close to the idea of a scooter, but without a footboard and with a slightly different seating position. There are no more women's motorcycle models, unlike bicycles. The scooter eventually became seen as the women's version of a motorcycle. It took another major war and the next wave of aircraft manufacturing companies competing for orders to finally make the scooter accessible to the general public. Slowly at first in the late 1940s, then with even greater force in the 1950s, the scooter became the best-selling vehicle in a truly global market. If Boltby had built a scooter again after World War II, perhaps today he wouldn't be so forgotten, and his Unibus would be celebrated for its genius and exquisite design. But it was Italian design talent that ignited the public's passion for scooters in the 1950s, and the production methods that made them affordable, along with the constant demand for lightweight means of transportation, made them the most popular vehicle in the world. That's the story of the world's first scooter, my friends. This is where my story comes to an end. You've been watching the Cross Moto channel. See you next time.